9 crazy royal remedies before the Black Death pandemic. Did you know that when coming face to face with death, royal aristocrats were willing to stoop to the most disgusting and filthy extremes? Everyone knows about their glamour, elegance, and splendor, but it's their dark, hidden corners that will truly leave us speechless. In 1348, a terrifying pandemic swept across Europe. They called it the Black Death. In just a few short years, it wiped out 25 million people, equating to a third of Europe's population at the time. From the poorest peasants in their dilapidated huts to the highest princes in their fortified castles, none were spared from its merciless grasp. But the royals and the ultra-wealthy simply could not accept such a miserable demise. They believed their noble blood entitled them to the most divine privileges. Armed with massive fortunes, they devised treatments that were absolutely horrifying and repulsive. From mixing feces with rancid fat and slapping raw onions onto festering buboes, to the most spine-chilling rituals you could never even dare to imagine. Today, we are going to expose the 9 most insane, expensive, and dangerous royal remedies used to fight the Black Death. But before we dive into this madness, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your quick support is our biggest motivation to keep unearthing the most terrifying secrets of history. To truly understand why wise monarchs and powerful queens could buy into such insane and borderline barbaric treatments, we must travel back to the mid-14th century. Originating from the arid steppes of Central Asia, this deadly pathogen silently crept along the Great Silk Road, hitching a ride on merchant caravans and Genoese trade ships to infiltrate Europe. When these ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily, Italy, in October 1347, the people ashore were met with a horrifying sight. Most of the sailors were already dead. The few who survived were groaning in sheer agony, their entire bodies covered in oozing, pitch-black boils. Authorities immediately ordered these death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. The plague had already spilled ashore. If you're wondering exactly how this disease killed its victims, here is the gruesome answer. First, the infected would experience severe chills, headaches, and a spiking fever. Just a day or two later, the lymph nodes in their neck, armpits, or groin would swell to the size of a chicken egg, or even an apple. These masses were rock hard, agonizingly painful, and became known as buboes. Before long, these swellings would burst, oozing blood and foul-smelling pus. Black spots would then spread across the body due to subcutaneous bleeding. Most victims drew their final harrowing breaths in a fit of violent convulsions within just 3 to 5 days. In a world engulfed by such suffocating darkness, the poor could do nothing but huddle and kneel in churches, waiting for death to call their names. But the royals and the aristocracy were different. They had fortified stone castles with high walls and deep moats to isolate themselves from the masses. They had underground vaults overflowing with gold, jewels, and fine silks. Most importantly, they had the wealth to buy the most lavish and exclusive medical treatments available. And that is exactly how the 9 insane remedies we are about to explore came to be. It is a raw, terrifying portrait of the luxurious despair of the medieval elite. Number 9. Slapping on human feces and rancid fat, the absolute pinnacle of disgust and despair. When prayers went unanswered by the heavens, when gold and magic proved utterly useless, sheer panic strangled the rationality of the elite, plunging them into the absolute abyss of filth. Medieval medical history recorded a prescription so vile that merely hearing about it today is enough to make your stomach churn. A thick, grotesque paste concocted from lily roots, pork fat left to rot until it reeked of putrefaction, and the most horrifying ingredient of all, human feces. Yes, you heard that right. Royal physicians dispatched men to scour the slums, harvesting the excrement of the lowest peasants who had miraculously survived the plague. They boiled this vile sludge, churning it into a thick ointment fueled by a morbid belief in fighting poison with poison. They theorized that the extreme putrefaction of the feces would react with and draw out the toxic pus from the plague buboes. Picture a gloomy afternoon in the outskirts of Siena, Italy. Inside a magnificent manor, a noble lady, a woman who had spent her entire life draped in fine silks and breathing in premium agar wood, now lay writhing and gasping for air on her deathbed. The physician, his face stone cold, slowly unsealed a terracotta jar swarming with black flies. An overpowering, pungent stench of decay immediately erupted from within. Using a wooden stick, he casually scooped up the dark, repulsive sludge and slathered a thick layer of it directly into the gaping, bleeding, and pus-filled ulcers on the lady's neck. The very second that filthy waste made contact with her torn flesh, the lady let out a blood-curdling shriek of despair. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she passed out cold. Swarms of pitch-black flies from the garden, catching the scent of the rot, instantly rushed into the room, buzzing frantically and covering the open wounds. There was no purifying miracle here. By packing a massive breeding ground of bacteria straight into the bloodstream, medieval medicine effectively handed the wealthy a one-way ticket to hell, guaranteeing the most agonizing and devastating blood infections in human history. Number 8. Drinking and bathing in their own urine, the most horrifying goblet of wine. Instead of downing narcotic powders or swallowing priceless crushed diamonds, many aristocrats opted for a more economical approach, one that demanded bone-chilling courage, consuming their own urine. Rooted in the dogmatic medical theory of balancing the body's four humors, the most learned physicians of the era confidently instructed their patients to drain every last drop of the very first urine they passed at dawn. Picture an imposing, massive castle where a powerful count writhes in agony, clawing at his mattress as pitch-black buboes swell to the size of lemons. Instead of savoring a glass of rich red wine, he must squeeze his eyes shut, hold his breath, and use his trembling, jade-ringed fingers to lift a solid gold goblet, filled to the brim with his own murky, reeking yellowish liquid, still steaming with body heat. He chugs it down in a single desperate gulp, tears streaming down his face as the bitter, salty, and nauseatingly pungent taste slides down his throat. But the vile ordeal didn't stop there. To maximize this divine efficacy, royal physicians ordered patients to stockpile their urine, letting it ferment for days to heighten its potency. They would then take this intensely foul, ammonia-rich concoction and vigorously scrub it into, or even bathe entirely in, their open, blood and pus-oozing sores. These proud royals, who once viewed themselves as gods on earth, ultimately perished not just from the plague, but in absolute, profound humiliation. A suffocating, foul stench of decay overshadowed their very last breaths. Number 7. Burning down cities and homes, fighting the plague with firestorms. When every ointment rubbed on the skin or potion forced down the throat proved useless, the panicked royals turned their attention outward. a deadly hypothesis took hold. The belief that the pathogen didn't spread through blood, but through miasma, a thick, invisible, toxic fog reeking of corpses. And what was the absolute fastest, most powerful way to purify the air? Unleashing massive fires to burn the demons away. The Pope and royal commanders gave the swift order: light the fires. They ignited gigantic bonfires of pine wood, roaring day and night at every intersection and public square. In their ultimate paranoia, they even ordered the arson of entire slum districts suspected of harboring the infected. In just a few nights, prosperous cities were engulfed in a sea of raging red flames and a thick, pungent, eye-stinging black smoke. The ferocious fires quickly spiraled out of human control, spreading to the fortified mansions of the very men who gave the orders. Agonizing screams echoed everywhere. Thousands of people, before their plague buboes could even burst, either suffocated in the toxic smoke or were burned alive, reduced to ash inside their own locked homes. It was a method of mass destruction that literally turned the mortal world into a blazing inferno. Number 6. Self-flagellation, a carnival of blood, shredded flesh, and fanaticism. Absolute despair breeds fanatics. When medicine was utterly powerless, when corpses piled up like mountains in the streets, a significant portion of the elite and nobility became brainwashed. They believed the Black Death was the physical manifestation of God's wrath on earth. The only way to survive wasn't through medicine, but through self-punishment, spilling their own blood to atone for their sins before God could snatch their lives away. The streets of medieval Europe suddenly transformed into the bloody stages of the flagellant processions. Thousands of people stripped to the waist, gripping tightly braided leather whips tipped with rusty metal shards and razor-sharp nails. They rushed madly into the streets, dragging their feet, howling prayers, and relentlessly swinging those deadly whips into their own bare backs. The sharp crack of the leather cutting through the air, mixed with piercing screams. With every strike, flesh was torn open and shredded. Their blood splattered onto the faces of bystanders, dripping heavily and staining the cobblestones a sickening red. Counts and barons who had once lived wrapped in soft silk now had their eyes rolled back in delirious pain, leaving their backs mangled, infected, and rotting. Ironically, these crawling mobs, carrying gaping wounds slick with fresh blood, inadvertently became the perfect passenger vehicles, attracting fleas and spreading the plague bacteria across the continent at breakneck speed. They thought they were saving humanity, but in reality, they were blowing the gates of hell wide open. Number 5. Bloodletting and starved leeches, draining the last drops of life. Blindly believing that the plague spread because the blood inside the body had been tainted by evil humors, medieval doctors prescribed a method that sounded highly medical, but was, in fact, a death sentence, draining all that toxic blood out. For the royals, this couldn't be done sloppily. It was executed using exquisite scalpels forged from pure silver, or dozens of fat leeches that physicians had intentionally starved for days. See it all? Imagine an 18-year-old noble girl gasping for air on a magnificent bed. Her face is deathly pale, her breathing shallow. Instead of giving her strength, the royal physician coldly approaches, takes an unsterilized silver blade, and without hesitation slices a decisive cut into the fragile vein of her wrist. Thick, dark blood oozes out, dripping into a brass basin with chilling plink sounds. On her other arm, the true horror begins. Dozens of pitch-black leeches, as thick as a thumb, slither wetly over her skin, frantically sinking their jagged teeth into the young maiden's flesh, greedily sucking away her final drops of vitality. The girl's body was already pushing itself to the absolute limit, draining every ounce of energy to fight millions of Yersinia pestis bacteria. Her immune system was on the verge of total collapse, and draining this massive amount of blood was like stripping her of her very last weapon. Exhausted, the girl's lips trembled wordlessly before she faded away forever. Meanwhile, the doctor scooped up the blood-gorged leeches, tossed them into a jar, and carried that same bloody, rusty scalpel straight into the next patient's room. Number 4. The Vicary Method, a life-or-death pact with a chicken's rump. If swallowing urine didn't give you goosebumps, welcome to the Vicary Method, where medicine intersected with the most barbaric and absurd logic in history. To perform this healing ritual, they didn't need herbs, and they didn't need scalpels. What they needed was a plump, healthy, live rooster. The logic of the British aristocratic medical elite at the time was so preposterous, it leaves you speechless. They believed a rooster's body possessed a natural force field, capable of sucking the poison out of a patient, exactly like a sponge soaking up water. Can you hear the agonizing groans mixed with frantic squawking inside the London Viscount's bedroom? 2 burly servants are pinning a live rooster to the floor, ruthlessly plucking the feathers from its tail and rump until the raw, bleeding red skin is exposed. Immediately, the doctor grabs the animal by the legs and vigorously, repeatedly rubs its bare, struggling behind directly onto the patient's pitch-black, oozing, orange-sized groin bubo. The Viscount screams loud enough to tear his own lungs out as the highly sensitive tumor is brutally compressed. The rooster, in a state of absolute panic, scratches wildly with its filthy claws, its heart pounding as it defecates uncontrollably right onto the open sore. The smell of fresh blood, pungent chicken feces, and rotting human flesh blend into a thick, suffocating stench that makes you want to vomit. The result of this miraculous therapy? Rubbing the claws and feces of a panicked animal into an open wound instantly triggered massive secondary infections. The tumor burst open, spewing pus, and turned necrotic overnight, and sending the Viscount to his grave at record speed. Number 3. Unicorn horns, the lie that stole lives. Moving away from the scenes of blood and fire, we arrive at a dark, tragic corner of the elite, being scammed into absolute ruin. In their desperation, the aristocracy was willing to empty their treasure vaults to hunt down unicorn horns, a substance rumored to be the purest in the universe, capable of neutralizing any demonic poison. But the bitter truth? Unicorns didn't exist. That powder, priced higher than human life, was nothing but poached Arctic narwhal tusks or rhino horns, slapped with a magical label by sinister merchants to swindle the rich. In the drizzling rain at a secret dock in Venice, a Marchioness hidden beneath a black cloak pushed forward a chest overflowing with solid gold coins in exchange for a pouch of divine horn powder. That night, inside her locked mansion, she personally brewed the medicine, her hands trembling as she spoon-fed the useless powder to her only son, who was writhing in a plague-induced fever. The child grimaced and gagged at the salty, fishy taste of sea-cured animal bone, but the mother simply smiled and stroked his hair, convinced that God's great magic was enveloping her boy's life. Just 3 days later, the child's body turned a deep, cold black. The Marchioness collapsed, clutching her son's corpse, weeping in pure madness. History's greatest lie didn't just drain colossal fortunes. It cruelly robbed the infected of their chance to live, stealing the precious last moments of people who were unfathomably wealthy, yet pitifully naive. Number 2. Bathing in rose water and vinegar. The ridiculous elegance of death. And finally, the remedy that seems the least bloody, yet perfectly exposes the absurd, delusional arrogance of the ultra-rich. Believing that pleasant fragrances could repel the putrid miasma of the pandemic, the European nobility became obsessively paranoid and developed a literal phobia of bad smells. At the court of King Edward III of England, the royals turned the palace into a vinegar and perfume factory. Monarchs soaked for hours in giant bathtubs, scattered with exorbitant rose petals. Dozens of maids bruised their knees day and night, scrubbing the stone floors with vinegar so pungent it burned the eyes. Whenever forced to step out of their chambers, nobles and counts rigidly covered their noses with beak-like masks, stuffed to the brim with sponges soaked in rosemary, cloves, and mint. They strutted past corridors littered with rotting corpses with a haughty, elegant flair, absolutely certain that this luxurious layer of scent was an invincible, invisible armor against death. But how incredibly ironic and mocking. While they frowned, squinted, and plugged their noses to fight the innocent air, right beneath the hems of those lavish, floor-sweeping velvet cloaks, rat fleas carrying the plague. Bacteria were quietly clinging, dancing, weaving their way to their skin, preparing to deliver the fatal bite. Number 1. Slapping raw onions on oozing buboes. Tears and exploding tumors. Do you know where the infamous name bubonic plague comes from? It comes from buboes, lymph nodes that swelled to the size of apples, turning pitch black or deep purple, bursting with pus, and clustering in the armpits, groins, and necks of the infected. These tumors were so swollen and tight that they felt like they could detonate at any moment, delivering a pain that pierced the heavens. And to deal with these slimy, ticking time bombs, royal physicians devised a unique and equally brutal method, using raw onions. Their logic was laughable, yet the aristocracy swallowed it whole. Onions have a pungent smell and make you cry when sliced. Therefore, that stinging property must contain a magical power that could suck the black poison right out of the body. Shift your gaze to a stifling room in one of Europe's wealthiest mansions. A fat merchant, a man who once breathed fire in the marketplace, now lies bare-chested, thrashing and drenched in sweat on his bed. In his armpit is a gargantuan bubo. The skin is paper-thin, inflamed red, and pulsing with every heartbeat. The doctor approaches, gripping a massive, freshly halved raw onion. Its pungent, stinging juices are practically dripping. Without a single word of warning, he forcefully slams the wet, a raw face of that onion directly onto the patient's agonizingly tight tumor. An ear-piercing shriek shatters the room. The intense acids and volatile oils from the raw onion instantly seep into the desperately inflamed, fragile skin, creating a searing, brain-burning agony. Under the brutal, crushing pressure of the doctor's hand, the pitch-black bubo can't withstand the force and explodes. A horrifying, nauseating spectacle unfolds. Thick black blood and yellow pus carrying billions of bacteria violently shoot out. The foul, putrid stench of rot mixes with the sharp, stinging scent of the onion, creating an atmosphere so repulsive that even the bystanders vomit on the spot. The merchant passes out from the excruciating pain. The doctor, meanwhile, wipes his hands and nods smugly, believing the poison has been successfully drawn out. But the cruel reality? Crushing a bubo with a dirt-covered raw onion didn't save the patient. It only ripped open a gaping wound, paving the way for dozens of other deadly infections to tear into the poor merchant's body. It was meant to be a cure, but it delivered the most authentic torture experience of the Middle Ages. Looking back at these glorious yet blood-soaked pages of history, we can't help but shudder at the insane, blind, and ruthless medical practices of the past. But beneath that absurdity lies a raw, tragic portrait of humanity's ultimate fear of death. The aristocracy, armed with all their pride, a gold, jewels, and supreme power, finally realized just how pathetically small and powerless they were against a mindless, invisible bacterium. The Black Death was a monumental nightmare, but it was also history's greatest equalizer. It didn't care whether you were draped in exquisite Venetian silk or dressed in torn, coarse rags. It taught humanity a brutal, bone-chilling lesson. Life can never be bought with wealth or class privilege. It must be safeguarded by knowledge, science, and empirical understanding. Our journey through these 9 royal remedies has come to an end, but history still harbors countless haunting, dark corners waiting to be explored. Out of the 9 insane treatments we just walked through, which one did you find the most terrifying or absolutely ridiculous? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. And if you loved this time-traveling journey to expose the dark secrets of the elite, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to stick around for more. Your support is our absolute biggest motivation to keep bringing these stories to life. Goodbye, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you in our next historical mystery.